Welcome to the Brains R Us podcast, brought to you by Centerpoint Research Institute. Each week, we explore the tools, insights, and breakthroughs that help you unlock your full potential. Whether it's mind-expanding research, powerful personal development strategies, or transformative stories, you're in the right place to upgrade your brain and your life. Today's conversation features author, meditation teacher, and social visionary Fleet Maull, PhD. Join MaryEllen and Fleet as they explore the power of radical responsibility, what it means to hold your seat in the midst of life's toughest challenges, and how mindfulness and trauma healing can transform not just individuals, but entire communities. This is an inspiring and eye-opening episode you're going to love. Now here's your host, Centerpoint CEO, MaryEllen Tribby.
All right. Well, welcome, Fleet. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, when we do these episodes of Brains R Us, they're always valuable to our listeners. But I have a feeling this episode, given all your life experience, is going to be kind of juicy. So I'm going to dive right in if that's okay.
Sounds great.
All right. So, Fleet, you've co-founded many organizations, Prison Dharma Network, Mindfulness and Public Safety, Engaged Mindfulness Institute. Which one would you say is closest to your heart right now, and why?
Well, it's kind of a tough call. They're all very close to my heart. But actually, I would say the one closest in some ways is actually one you didn't mention, which is those are three divisions of a nonprofit. They function like kind of almost separate organizations, but they're all under one umbrella, and very close to my heart. I'm very engaged in all that, and also the nonprofit I started that launched the prison hospice movement. But probably what's closest to my heart right now is the for-profit organization that I founded called Heart Mind Institute. Our goal there is really to reach 1 billion people over the next 10 to 20 years with experiences that increase people's faith and confidence in their own innate goodness and that of others, as well as effective skills for self-regulation, to regulate our own autonomic nervous system so we can show up as our best self, and then to co-regulate effectively with others to optimize our relationships and our overall society. So we feel if we can reach 1 billion people with that, in collaboration with others, that can really bring about global transformation. So that's I'm very excited about that. I think the possibilities of that are so huge that I'm very passionate about. But I'm also, very passionately involved in the other organizations you mentioned.
Wow, that is awesome. When you think about that global transformation, that is incredible. So let's take it from there and go way back. What was your very first experience with meditation? And did you love it right away, or did you resist it like so many people do?
I wouldn't say I resisted it. I had a longing. I had an interest. I think I was always kind of a seeker by nature. But I actually started trying to do meditation on my own, living in a little valley off the sacred valley of the Incas in Peru, and very isolated kind of part of the Andes Mountains there. And I had a little book called, it was a Taoist meditation manual called The Secret of the Golden Flower, which had a foreword in that translation by Carl Jung. And I was trying to learn it myself out of a book. And I wasn't making great progress. And I would get it going for a few days and I'd forget about it. Then I'd go a month later, oh yeah, I was going to do that. And I kind of realized I needed more support to really develop a practice. And I continued to study, trying to learn things out of books. But that was really one of my motivations in 1974 for traveling from Peru to Boulder, Colorado to enroll at then the Naropa Institute, now Naropa University. I went there and I ended up doing a very intense 3-year clinical training program in Buddhist and Western psychology and psychotherapy. But the real reason I went there was to establish a practice. And that was successful because I was able to access really profound teaching there and get a lot of community support to deepen my practice.
Wow, that's fascinating. Now, you mentioned Carl Jung. So you've trained, though, with some spiritual giants. So tell us who they were And what was the most surprising lesson you learned from them that still guides you today?
Hmm. Well, my first teacher, my really core teacher in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition was Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, the founder of Naropa University. What I learned so much from him. I mean, he just radically transformed my life. But one of the things that has always stood me very well, even recently, I just came back from a very challenging journey back to Peru to deal with some family stuff down there, and actually the death of my son's mom.
Oh, I'm
And
sorry.
yeah, and I lost my son there 4 years ago. So this is a part of a whole journey and other complex things going down around there, around family heritage and lack of wills and some property, things like that. They're complicated. But anyway, uh, that's what really served me was um, one of the metaphors that my Tibetan teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, used for training, for mind training and training in meditation and that kind of spiritual and contemplative training was this idea of holding your seat. And he got that from the dressage uh, tradition of equestrian discipline, right? And his wife, actually, an English woman, was a dressage master, still is. It competes and trains horses at the highest level in dressage. And in dressage, unlike other styles of kind of English riding, you don't post when you're at a trot, canter, or gallop. You don't your butt doesn't rise out of the seat like it does with conventional English riding. You stay in the seat and you never lose contact with the horse. And your hips have to move in an entirely new way, right? And if you're training in dressage, you might be in a ring with a trainer and you're on the horse and they have the horse on a long line, a longe line, and you're going around circles and the trainer might be yelling at you, hold your seat, right? And the trainer, of course, is training you and the horse simultaneously. And so he used that, and he became an incredible rider himself. Here he arrived from Tred already with horsemanship skills, but he became a really skillful rider at that level. He had this big, beautiful white Lipizzaner stallion that he rode, and he was partially paralyzed, half his body. So amazing, he could get up on that stallion, and it was just amazing. And at any rate, he used that as a metaphor. When you think about in meditation, you usually sit on a meditation cushion, you sit down,
Yeah.
and you kind of some other meditation teachers have said, meditation, you put your butt on the cushion and you take what you get, right? So the idea is you commit, you stay there, you stay there, you don't run away. And so that holding your seat has stood me really well throughout my life. And the training I've received and training I've been doing over more than 50 years now since I met him um, has really served me well in order to be able to have the awareness, the resilience, the emotional intelligence, the ability, the self-regulation, self-leadership capacity to really hold my seat in the midst of really tough situations.
That's awesome. So you must have been a child when you met him. Oh my goodness.
I was in my 20s, let's say that.
So you've coined the phrase radical responsibility. Can you give us the elevator pitch of what it is and why it's so needed today?
Yeah, well, actually, I don't mean to interrupt, but I want to share one other thing before we go here. And that was one of my other core teachers, my Zen teacher, Bernie Glassman. I've practiced very deeply in both those traditions for many, many years. And Bernie Glassman is one of the renowned Western Zen teachers. And he's very famous for integrating social action and peace work with Zen. And he was also really an entrepreneur and a social entrepreneur. And so, but he developed a framework along with colleagues that is, you can find roots of it in various traditions, but he articulated it in a unique way. And it was called the three tenets of the peacemaker work. And this has also served me incredibly well. The first one is not knowing. The first one is to get out of conditioned mind, which I think is the goal of all the inner practices of all the world's contemplative traditions. How do you get out of conditioned mind into direct experience? But so not knowing, we talk about letting go of fixed ideas about ourselves, others, and the world, right? So we can actually get fresh data, right? And that's a lot easier said than done. We have layer after layer after layer of conditioned filters that we're constantly filtering everything through without even knowing it, right? So So getting into not knowing is easier said than done. And one of the things he used to do to help us do that, rather than just going to a nice Zen center to have a Zen session, a Zen retreat, he would take us out on the streets with no money for 4 or 5 days at a time. And I still do that. I still take people on the streets. You're out in the streets in New York City or London or Marburg, Germany, or Austin, Texas, or San Francisco, and surviving on the streets with no money for 3, 4, 5 days at a time. It throws you out of your known world into a state of not knowing, right? So not knowing. The second one is bearing witness. And bearing witness is similar to the idea of Trungpa Rinpoche's idea of holding your seat. Bearing witness is you allow yourself to be touched by the joy and suffering of life. You don't run away. And without the protection of your knowing, that's a much rawer experience. So you actually let it in. And then the third is been called healing. It's been called loving action. It's been called compassionate action. In business, I've called it effective action. If we, to the extent that we can literally bear witness from this place of not knowing, then what arises from that is the natural wisdom of reality, the wisdom of what is. And that's going to lead to healing or lead to compassionate action or effective action. So that three tenets, I would say those two things, I've been interweaving them my entire life, and they've stood me very well in all my life's activities. The idea of holding your seat and these three tenets of the peacemaker work.
Well, I'm going to go off script and I want to talk about a little bit more about the three tenets. And can you tell us about someone that you took on that journey and what they experienced and how? Because when you say you're on the streets, no money, 3 or 4 days, I think mostly of like my kids, right? Who nowadays kids like you can't survive, a night in the backyard without their phone, right? And so what was that like?
Yeah, well, it's very eye-opening for people. It was eye-opening for me the first time. Every time I go out there, it's still eye-opening.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of benefits of it. One, it really shifts our relationship to people living on the streets and people who are unhoused or what we
Yes.
call homeless at times, which includes families, all kinds of people. And of course, there is addiction out there and there's mental illness out there. There's a lot of that, but there's also just people falling through the cracks that have been living month to month and lose a job and suddenly they're out on the streets, right? And so it really shifts your relationship. You never quite relate the same again. I mean, whenever I'm passing people on the streets who are panhandling, if I have something, I offer it to them. And people can get all kinds of things. Well, am I enabling? Are they going to? I just don't worry about that. They're asking, and I just, for me, it's an opportunity to express generosity. Another thing is that you learn that you can survive out there, which is kind of very empowering. It's amazing. I've read before about how many highly successful, well-resourced people have this abiding fear they're going to end up homeless someday, right?
Mhm. Wow.
But we all have that fear about, if the other shoe drops kind of fear, right? That anxiety, that survival anxiety is kind of baked into the human condition. So when you're out there, um, you kind of get that, okay, I don't choose to live out there, but I could survive because you figure out, you get to know people, you figure out where this church is offering a meal at lunch, that place you can go here for this, you can go get some clean socks at this place. And, you figure out, you even figure we sleep on the streets. There's plenty of food on the streets generally, depends on the city, but there's a lot of different places you can, but we don't go to the shelters because there is nowhere near enough housing or bed spaces. So we actually sleep on the streets. And it's hard to find places to sleep on the streets where the police won't bother you or somebody else won't call, So, but you figure it out. And it gives you this very empowered sense. The other thing that happens is that after you're out there for a few days and you're looking back at the regular middle class folks going around, and a lot of times we're in downtown areas, but also we're also often in very rough areas of cities, lots of different areas. But you see those folks and you think you still belong to that club, if you will. But you suddenly realize at a certain point after you get a bit grungy and dirty and because it just happens when you're out there, you realize they're not looking back at you like you belong to that club anymore.
Right.
You experience this quality of being invisible, which of course people of color and women in the workplace have experienced forever, but you actually get that experience firsthand for the first time. Or if they are looking at you or relate to you, often it's with derision, right?
Mhm.
And so you have that experience, and that's very eye-opening, right? Very eye-opening, very leveling.
Yeah.
And so it's a profound experience, and it really shakes you out of all your known frameworks of how you kind of figure out how to live your life on a daily basis. So it does throw you in that place of not knowing. And we do those. We also take groups of people to Auschwitz every year, to the former Nazi death camp. We go there every November, and there's been, we call these bearing witness retreats, and we've been doing those around the world at places of genocide and so forth. And again, these places throw you into not knowing,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Yes. My daughter went to Auschwitz, right, her freshman year of college, the summer, like 7, 8 years ago, and she called me from there, and she said, "This is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life." And so these experiences, and I have to say that she's one of the most compassionate, kind people I know, right? So I can imagine what these experiences do for people. Oh, I have, oh, okay. All right. You threw me. Okay. Let's go back to the radical responsibility. Okay. Tell us, tell us what that elevator pitch is and why that it's needed today in the world.
I generally describe radical responsibility as voluntarily embracing 100% responsibility or ownership for each and every circumstance we face day in and day out. Now, that may sound common sense, but if you really think about each and every circumstance, and that includes the ones we can see we might have had a little something to do with creating or allowing or enabling, or somehow we had some contribution to this circumstance arriving in our life. But it also includes all the ones we don't see we had anything to do with, and everybody might agree, no, that just fell out of the sky landed on your head, and there it is, right? But at some point, and even when we look at our part in things, and that's very important, we don't look at that for blame. The most important distinction in this model is that it is completely beyond blame. It has nothing to do with blaming others, obviously, but it has not one iota to do with blaming ourselves, and it's certainly not about blaming victims. It's about choice and about ownership, and where do we have the most agency, the most personal power, right? That's with our own choices, our own behaviors, right? As you know, and it's natural to when things happen to want to blame and deflect, and we all have very vulnerable hearts, and we've all been bruised and blamed, and we don't want to feel that anymore. So we almost automatically deflect, right? And blame shift. But what good does it do us? To the extent, the amount of time I spend in, kvetching and blaming others and all that kind of thing I may get into, as reasonable as human as it is, how creative is that? What does it really do?
Yeah.
The only place I can put my energy that really has any real power is, what am I going to do? We call that the magical radical responsibility question. No matter how bad things are, or how unjust they seem, or how unfair they seem, I can simply take a breath and say, okay, I don't like this. Maybe this is whatever, but what can I do? What's the most creative way I can respond to this situation that's going to move my own life forward in a good way? And if I think in terms of my own enlightened self-interest, which is my long-term interest, it usually works out to be in the interest of others as well, because we're all interconnected, right? Maybe
Right.
short-term interest, maybe I just want to complain, or maybe I want to hit somebody or something, but in long term, I'm going to act on, what's really going to move my life forward in a good way. So this is this idea of radical responsibility. It's really about choice. It's about personal power. It's about agency. And we hear about personal responsibility in our society, right? But it's mostly lip service, and there's so much blame that goes on. There's so much shaming and so much blame. And it's just interestingly, politically, we all know our society has become so polarized politically. It's worse than it's ever been. And there's always been the extremes, but it seems that we used to be in the middle. We could have conversation, disagree, but somehow we move forward. Now it's like the extremes have taken over. But nonetheless, on those sides, it's like, from the left, generally, um, people want to talk about causes and conditions, right? It's not people's fault. It's the causes and conditions and so as society, we need to change the causes and conditions so that people aren't victimized by all the injustice, right? And
Mhm.
then on the right, they want to talk about personal responsibility, right? And with any reasonable reflection, you realize it's both. It's absolutely both. Yes, we want to level the playing field as much as we possibly can, and it's never going to be perfect, but we would all aspire that everybody would have as much opportunity as they can possibly have, right? And at the same time, it's up to each one of us. By the time we're an adult, it's really about our choices, right? And so it's really both. It's not either or. And
Right.
that either or keeps us stuck in a completely, in a win-lose framework,
Right.
politically and socially. So it's really about radical responsibility is about empowering ourselves to embrace our own lives and move our own lives forward, and both individually and collectively in the most positive way we can.
Oh, that's so well said. I totally agree with you. My goodness.
This episode of Brains Are Us is brought to you by the Journey to Self Suite, a Shadowwork HoloSync collection designed to help you bring awareness to the shadows that prevent you from experiencing more love, forgiveness, compassion, and gratitude in your life. Go to myholosync.com/brains19 to learn more.
Now, I think this next section might surprise some of our listeners, but you spent 14 years in federal prison. I want to pause on that for a second. How did mindfulness really look on the inside? Was it easy for you to practice your daily routines, or was it a battle?
Well, to begin with, the rack responsibility philosophy and approach that we just discussed, I developed that in prison. There were roots of it in my life and influences and so forth, but it was really when I got to prison, and I could have blamed all kinds of folks. I could have blamed those circumstances of my childhood. I could have blamed the alcoholism in my family. I could have blamed all the people whose time I did, all the people who testified against me rather than going to jail themselves. Most of them who were actually much more involved than I was. I refused to testify against anybody, not because I was some kind of stand-up guy, but I've been a Buddhist for a long time, and I couldn't see, oh, somebody else is gonna suffer, somebody else's children's gonna suffer, somebody else's family gonna suffer, so I can go free. It just didn't meet with me, so that was never a question for me, but there were plenty of people who were completely willing to do that. Also, when the government prosecutes you, they play hardball. They break all the rules, they break the laws, they don't care, they just do what they need to do to put you away. So I could have focused on all that, and I chose not to. I realized right away that any hope I had of surviving my time in prison, and originally I was sentenced to a 30-year no parole sentence,
Wow.
and I didn't realize for about the first 6 months that I'd been sentenced, fortunately, under the old law prior to 1987, when you got allowed what was called good time, if you stayed out of trouble. And I finally figured that out. I realized, okay, if I stay out of trouble, I'll serve 18 and a half years on that 30-year sentence. Then on my appeal, um, which took about 2.5, 3 years to go through the courts. They knocked off one count. I had 5 counts that had been uh, um, added together to make my sentence. Knocked off one count, so that reduced my sentence from 30 to 25. And then knew I would serve 14 and a half if I stayed out of trouble, and that's what I ended up serving. But initially, I thought when I was sentenced, the paper next morning said I was 35 years old. The paper said I would be 65 before I'd have any chance of release. I pretty much thought my life was over. But I knew right away when I got there, I knew if I'm gonna survive this, have any chance of surviving this, and if I'm gonna have any hope of creating any kind of life for myself when I get out, I need to embrace like 200% ownership for having got myself here and for what I'm gonna do with it, right? So that was absolutely clear. I also realized that I was in such a negative environment full of everybody had their victim story. I mean, we generally think the people in prison are the perpetrators, and many of them have been perpetrators, but they all feel like victims, right?
Mhm.
They are the victim, and many were victimized in their childhood, and that's how they ended up showing up the way they have in life, right? So there's a victimization all over the place. But there's so much anger, so much bitterness, so much victim thinking, um, and all kinds of other really untoward attitudinal qualities that I did not want to embrace. And I realized if I wasn't really proactive about not embracing all that and about getting really clear about who I was and how I wanted to live, I could come out that way. And I didn't even want to live that way in prison, much less come out broken, bitter, and having all that stuff. So that's really where that was born. And in terms of mindfulness, some people hear my story, they think, well, I discovered meditation in prison. It's not the case. I've been practicing pretty deeply and studying deeply and even been trained as a teacher to a degree for 10 years before I ever went to prison. So that begs the question, why did I end up in prison? Well, suffice it to say, I was very good at compartmentalizing my life, and I had a lot of twisted, thorny karma, what have you, but it took me a while to untangle everything. But when I got to prison, I was beyond super motivated. There's an expression of like practicing like your hair is on fire in the spiritual traditions.
Mhm.
It was my son was 9 years old at the time.
Wow.
And I was absolutely devastated over what I'd done to him. I was devastated over what I'd done to my own life, how I'd let down my family, my community, my spiritual teachers, but I was completely devastated over what I'd done to my son, and I finally had to face the reality of all the incredible selfish decisions I've been making for so long with all kinds of justifications, putting his life at risk, putting his mom's life at risk, and so I had to face that, and I became absolutely radically dedicated to get all the negativity out of my life and do something with my life that would leave a better legacy for my son than just his dad went to prison or even his dad died in prison, because I had no surety that I would survive my time. There was a lot of violence there. I was doing my time at the maximum security federal prison hospital in Springfield, Missouri. So men were dying of cancer and AIDS. This is in the heights of the AIDS epidemic, liver cancer, all kinds of things. And so there was death everywhere. And I had no surety I would survive my time. And I wanted to really focus on how I could take what the good I've been given and do something positive with it to leave my son a better legacy. And also, it was really clear to me right off the bat that the jig was up. And in terms of, it was all going to be about my practice. That if I was going to be able to do anything good or valuable in that environment, it was going to come out of my practice. So I was practicing 2, 3 hours a day and more on weekends. And also, I realized that my interest in the meditative traditions, and in particular various Buddhist meditative traditions, had been primarily around the awareness practices and mind and psychology and awake. That's what always been my interest. And I was giving really short shrift to the ethical foundations of those traditions, which are very important parts of those traditions. And so I also realized I needed to focus on that. And I embraced the ethical principles of what's called precepts practice, and really grounded my life both in living an ethical life and focusing on a really intensive daily meditation practice. And that really became the foundation for all the things I was able to accomplish during my time there and since.
Wow. So clearly you were not in club fed, but I would be remiss if I didn't say what led you to that prison though. What was the government after you for or charging you for?
Oh yeah, I meant to say that before. I was in on drug charges during my. I graduated from high school in 1968, the very tumultuous year in U.S. history with Kent
Yeah.
State massacres, the assassination of Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, and much more. And I was a classic angry young man with a big hole in my gut, and I just went headlong into the counterculture and the drug, sex, and rock and roll and the radical politics, the whole thing. I just went headlong into all that. And I was very socially and politically alienated from the culture. I really didn't believe anything. And eventually I wanted to get out of that, the craziness of the drug culture. And I left for South America. I had this idea. I was always seeking something genuine. I was trying to plug back into real experience. I had an experience of my childhood felt very magical, and I felt very plugged into reality. And then around 5 or 6, maybe it was going to school, maybe it had to do with alcoholism in my family, but it all went away. It was just gray tones. And I wanted that vivid, magical reality, that awe, that kind of connectedness back. And, I found there were elements of it in the drug, sex, and rock and roll stuff, but it's all kind of mirage-like, and if you have a propensity to addiction, there's a lot of baggage that comes with it. But I was always seeking it. Somewhere I had the idea that I would discover that in Peru. I have no idea. It didn't have to do with the drugs. I didn't even know where I got that idea. But I took off traveling. It took a long time. I lived on a sailboat for the year in the Caribbean, which was very cleansing. I eventually made my way down to Peru, and it was a very magical place. The whole environment was magical. But sadly, the first time I came back, I realized I wasn't able to carry that with me. It was environmental. I hadn't internalized it yet. And, but it was down there living as an expat, justifying a criminal lifestyle, getting involved in small scale smuggling as a way to live outside the system, and then going back to school and dealing with my marital problems, which were a result of my own craziness. I kept all my problems at bay with money, and I justified all that until I knew it had to stop before I managed, and I did stop, but before I untangled it all, it caught up with me, and others that I'd been involved with continued, and so I was invited to the party, so to speak. So anyway, all that led to me going to prison on drug charges. Mhm.
Wow. So is that before or after you received your PhD?
That was, after.
Wow.
No, I'm
Wow.
sorry. No, I'm sorry. It was after the 3-year clinical training program. No, I did my PhD study during prison, and I completed all the coursework for it, by the time I got out of prison, and I started my dissertation, but then I got really busy, and it took me, I don't know, another 15 years before I actually finished my dissertation and got my PhD, but I eventually managed to do that.
Oh my gosh, that's so interesting. And so, what's something people assume about prison reform or mindfulness work that totally misses the mark?
Well, some people get the idea, if they know something about meditation and contemplative life, they may think, oh, well, prisons, that's kind of like going to a monastery or an ashram. You got all that time on your hands. You got 3 hots and a cot, they say, 3 meals a day and a place to sleep. And you all wear similar clothes. So but that's where the parallels end right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, monasteries and ashrams and spiritual centers are designed for reflection and to support practice, and not that there aren't problems there. They're people, so they have, but still, they're designed that. Prison's not. Prison is a completely dehumanizing environment, full of noise and craziness and violence. On a good day, you might only have a half dozen really dehumanizing encounters with either the staff or your fellow prisoners on a good day, right? And there's violence waiting around every corner. I mean, it's a really tough environment, and so people get this idea that, now I was able to make it my monastery and my ashram in many ways, but it's because I came in with a lot of training and skills already. And there are other prisoners, and I'm in touch with a lot of them through the nonprofits we built, um, that did discover meditation in prison and are eventually able to make that environment their ashram or their monastery. But it's not because the environment or the authorities are cooperating with that. It's because you do it internally, right? And you do have the sense of the isolation. You have the isolation and you have the time, right? But other than that, you got to create it yourself. So I think that's one of the misnomers. And the other in terms of prison reform, um, a big thing that people don't get, uh, 90, I don't know what the number is, over 95%, maybe 97% of prisoners are going to get out, whether we like it or not. They're going to get out someday, and they're going to be our neighbors again, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So would we like them to be better than when they went in, the same, or worse? I would hope we'd like them to be better and have the capacity to return and become good citizens and good neighbors. But everything we're doing is promoting just the opposite.
Right.
We brutalize them for whatever time they're in and put them in incredibly negative environments. We pay lip service to some rehabilitative program, and there's the odd good program here or there, but they don't really get supported in the long run. And so people generally, with some exceptions, some people turn their lives around in prison, no question about that. But the majority come out worse than they went in. And so we need to, first of all, we're putting way too many people in prison. We should reserve prisons for really people who are a danger to themselves and others, mostly violent crime, or at least to give them a short wake-up call. But there's no point in putting people in prison for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years who are not really a risk to themselves or others. And we should reserve that for those, and then we'd have a lot more resources to try to really provide an environment where they could turn their lives around, or at least have a life of dignity, even if they can never get out. And the rest of the people should really be in some kind of community corrections programs, which are proven effective. Now, are they perfect? Is there going to be somebody in a community corrections program that's going to commit an offense and then the press is going to go wild and say we should lock everybody up? It's called incident politics. It happens. But if you look at the numbers, they're vastly, they're they cost 5% of what it costs to lock somebody up. And, they're 95% effective. Well, those are pretty good numbers. Is it going to be perfect? No. But anyway, we waste all these resources locking people up. We're shifting all the resources away from, pre neonatal care, early childhood education, supporting mothers, supporting families, and we're putting it all at the end of the system to warehouse human beings, in many cases for profit. So it's really wrongheaded
Right.
and doesn't work, and we know that, but having the political will to change it, is tough, especially when you have politicians that make hay on the whole, fear-based, tough on crime thing.
But it seems like you're doing a lot towards that. You've worked with correction officers, first responders, even law enforcement, often seen as very hard to reach groups emotionally. So, what's one moment that really broke through and made you emotional with working with these kind of folks?
I'll say two things. I had an experience in prison. I mentioned before about our goal of reaching people with experiences that increase their own faith and confidence in their own innate unconditional goodness and that of others, which actually is the dominant worldview cross-culturally and historically, despite here in the West that we have these ideas of the flawed nature of humanity and all that, which I think are just twists on theology that happen because of the fear-based nature of the human condition. Survival and fear is baked into our human condition. So I think we tend to twist things in that direction. But the cross-cultural historical dominant view has been that human nature is unconditionally good. And so, but I'm from Missouri, the Show Me State. So I'd like to believe that. But during my time in prison, I had this kind of running experiment going, because there were a lot of characters, both among my fellow prisoners and among the staff, who you kind of wondered if there was really any redeemable qualities there or really any well-buried unconditional goodness. So I always had kind of my top 5 list amongst the staff and my fellow prisoners of, these I might have finally disproven the theory and found somebody that actually does not have basic goodness. Maybe not a very helpful thing to be doing, but anyway, I had time on my hands. But inevitably, every one of those people that ever reached into my top 5 list would eventually reveal their innate goodness and humanity to me. And there was one particular guard. And this guard was, anytime you encountered him anywhere in this big prison, they move guards around with different duties. They're in this unit, that unit, this unit. And you never got anything but just hate and venom and aggression. And, it just gave everybody a hard time, just seemed to be a miserable human being and, slept on a bed of nails or something. Who knows? But he was just like, that's all you ever got from him. And you generally stayed away from him. So I was coming down the hall to go into a particular unit to see a friend, and I see he's on duty. I go, oh boy, I mean, how can I kind of slip by and not have to interact with this guy, right? And he goes, hey, Maull, come here. I go, oh boy. He goes, hey, I saw you in the visiting room the other day with your son. How's he doing? And it just blew me away.
Wow.
He was genuinely interested in how my son was doing, And my son was young at the time, probably 11 or 12, I'd come for a visit. And, yeah, it just was amazing.
Wow.
Well, we saw that again and again, so many different ways. Now, on the outside, I do a lot of training. We have a program called Mindfulness-Based Wellness and Resiliency. So we're training corrections professionals, probation and parole, community police, first responders of all kinds, how to work in a way that is less damaging to themselves, how to work and how to use self-regulation skills so they can be less damaged at work and heal more readily. Because the statistics, if you look at correctional officers, and it's similar across all these professions, correctional officers who spend 20 years working in secure units, on the tier, so to speak, in prisons, secure prisons, they have a life expectancy of about 59 years, 20 years less than the general population.
Wow.
And they're dying of all the chronic stress-related physical ailments, and as well as all the maladaptive things of addiction and alcoholism, and they're dying of suicidality. And so it's a really troubled population, a lot of obesity, all kinds of problems. And so we have these programs to help them turn that around. And very often, first of all, they say, well, I can't do this mindfulness stuff. My mind's racing all the time. And are you trying to help me relax? And then I'm going to get, attacked by somebody. And we have to get through all that kind of stuff. But we use very simple little self-regulation skills that we can introduce them to and get them to try them that have immediate impacts. And I go, wow. Oh, you guided me into really being kind of stressed out. And then you had me do that. And I just felt my whole nervous system chill out. Wow, that's pretty magical. And then they start using this stuff and they see it changing their lives. We also teach them how to get out of all the drama because they have a lot of drama in their lives. Sure, drama. A lot of them say we have a harder time with our fellow officers than we do with the prisoners. A lot of peer drama because it's a high stress environment. They haven't been given a lot of self-regulation, co-regulation, emotional intelligence skills, quite the opposite. And there's just all kinds of chaos and drama and craziness going on. And so we teach them how to recognize that and make boundaries with it. So they start to have less drama in their lives. They also apply these skills at home and they start, their life just starts changing. They're sleeping for the first time in their careers through the night, right? And they're finding their relationship with their children and their spouses is radically improving. And they come back, we do these 10-week programs where I go do a full day of training. And then we have these community practice groups over 8 weeks that are facilitated by others locally or online. And then I come back at the end for another full day of training. And that they come up to me on the breaks and they tell me these incredible stories of transformation about how their life is changing, their family life is changing. They've gotten off blood pressure medications, they've lost weight. Like I said, they're sleeping for the first time in their career. So many things. So it's incredibly gratifying. And it's, I teach in all kinds of venues. And a lot of time when you take these kind of things into the regular world where people have had some exposure to it, or you take it into the corporate world where it's some exposure. And a lot of people are kind of, oh yeah, I've been there, done that. What do you got this new? They're evaluating. Should I learn from you? There's a certain cynicism or jadedness.
Right.
But with these folks, they're not jaded at all about that. They're just like they just soak it up. Oh my God, that works. Oh my God, it's improving my life right now, right? And so it's really gratifying to see that transformation, and also to really see um, all these folks, as human beings with a really tough job, who are working hard to keep us all safe, and they're not well supported in many cases by their institutions or, any kind of government work. There's always budget cuts, and there's this and there's that going on. So everybody it's not a well supported
Right.
enterprise. So you can imagine what's going on in the federal government right now with all the firings, and it's like, it operates in a realm of budget scarcity and people mandatory overtime, and people are stressed out and they don't feel supported by their management. They don't feel support. And so it's a tough job, but they show up every day and they're working to keep us safe. And so you really get a sense of their bravery, their warriorship, their dignity. And it's very powerful.
I love that you're able to help them break through like that. That is incredible. So, with that being said, what's one of the boldest things you've ever said to a room full of government officials or prison staff, and how did they respond?
Well, one of the bold things that I don't say it so much anymore, but in the beginning I pretty much had to. Well, I didn't do it once, and somebody kind of raised some hullabaloo about it, but was disclosing my background, right?
Huh?
So I get up in front of a room full of correctional officers, probation, other government staff, especially correctional officers or cops, and I let them know that, I spent 14 years in a federal prison. It just a pall goes up, it's like I just dug myself into a big hole, and I spend the rest of the day climbing back out of it, and I do. I use humor, and I'm a pretty good trainer, so I get in a relationship with them, I find my way, to do that, but initially, it's like, "Whoa," and, uh, but other than that, I think one of the bold things I've said in different ways in different times, because, like most people in life, they've all got a huge victim story going on.
Uh-huh.
They're overworked, they're not supported by their managers, they're dealing with, all these prisoners who the government treats the prisoners better than they treat them, which is not true, but they basically most governments don't treat anybody all that well,
Right.
but, there's exceptions, but, it's just a really so everybody's got this big victim story going on, and especially management. There's a lot of, union, line staff management issues and all that kind of stuff, and so, often I try to listen empathically, and I want them to get that I get their situation. I get how unresourced it is. I get all this stuff, and I really appreciate the job they're doing and the tremendous warriorship and honor and how they're helping keep us all safe. I appreciate all that. But at some point, I basically challenge, "Yeah, that's kinda the way it is. What are you gonna do about it?" They're not used to hearing that.
How do they react?
And, well, some of them get upset, but eventually, we get into conversations about, um, how not only how regardless of how unresourced or how difficult the situation is, how they can take better care of themselves, and then secondly, how they can actually become agents of change. And
Mhm.
I challenge them, "Do you really think the system's gonna change and get better, and it's gonna be done by those people up there somewhere? If anybody's gonna change the system, it's gonna be you all."
Yeah.
Just you're gonna become different, and you're gonna demand that things are different, and that's gonna ripple up, right? And, So that's how change is going to happen. So that's a very challenging thing, kind of comes out of the radical responsibility model. Now, every now and then we get pushback or we'll hear things like, I hope these changes aren't just coming in. Management hired these people to just come in here and help us cope with the lousy managers, you know? And so we have to be a little careful that they don't see that we're doing that. We're not just agents of, well, they're going to give us these skills and management can make us work harder. So it's a difficult landscape. So I have to, really be clear. I have to really get in relationship with them with a lot of empathic understanding. And until you get in relationship, you can't really introduce something new, right? You have to get in relationship.
Yeah.
When I learned that in prison, I was a school teacher for 14 years in prison.
Wow.
And I really wanted to help my fellow prisoners. I was helping them learn to read, get their GED, study for college classes and things like that. But before, a lot of my others that had a similar role to me, they'd go hide off in the corner somewhere and they'd tell people like, if you need help, come get me. But otherwise, just because when you're in prison, there's these real boundaries among like, if you try to exercise any kind of authority or influence, who are you, the police, and we'll see you outside, right? And anybody can kill you at any moment, anywhere in prison quite easily, right? So, it's that environment. So you have to, before I could really be proactive about trying to encourage my fellow prisoners to learn and change, and many of them, their whole thing around school is just all negative. It's been nothing but a negative story for them. And they're being forced to go to school. And if they didn't go, they'd throw them in the hole. And then they'd come back to school even more pissed off. So I learned the hard way that I really painstakingly had to get in relationship with each and every one. And until that relationship and rapport was there was no way I was going to be able to influence them or try to guide them or suggest they move in this direction or that way. The relationship has to come first.
Now, believe it or not, you are not the first person that I know and talk to that has been to prison. I know 3 other people, and 2 were kind of in that very much club med, or club fed kind of prison where the other one was not. And from what I heard, there was tremendous amount of brutality, cruelty, very traumatic experience. And now you work very deeply with trauma. So what's the most misunderstood thing about healing trauma, especially in men in these kind of institutionalized populations?
Yeah, I came out of prison in 1999, and so for the first, really for the first 20 years, I had vivid nightmares every night, prison dreams,
Really?
full of violence, or I was supposed to be getting out and I wasn't getting out, or I was out and going to get busted again and go back to prison forever, or violence. I mean, I just knew going to sleep every night I'm going to have these technicolor prison dreams. And I don't anymore. I finally have kind of worked that through with a lot of work. And I also have some stuff from childhood with alcoholism in my family and so forth. But I think the biggest thing about trauma is, especially among men in our culture, is there's a lot of denial around it and a lot of misunderstanding around it. Trauma is basically um, when when we're challenged, when we're challenged with things that are threatening in some way or another, it activates our stress system. It activates the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. We get this arousal starts happening, and our whole system starts reorganizing itself to either stand and fight, run like heck, or play dead. Right? Fight, flight, or freeze. And so when we're challenged and overwhelmed from incidents in childhood or adulthood, or even we know we can pass this stuff on epigenetically, so there's ancestral trauma, generational trauma. It becomes these stuck patterns of dysregulation. Our nervous system is dysregulated, and it gets stuck in different ways. And it may not be active all the time, but a memory can trigger it or something. But it's there. It's in our nervous system. It's in the body, and it's these stuck patterns of dysregulation. And so there is no way around doing the work to proactively heal that. And what we need to do is we need to gradually reclaim the body through various techniques. And often the body feels like enemy territory because the trauma's there and it's triggering to go there. And everybody's different, right? But you need skills that can help people gradually begin to reclaim the body in a titrated way, leaning in, leaning out, leaning in, leaning out, and gradually develop a relationship with the body where you can access states of well-being and flow that begin to let your nervous system untangle and the knots work themselves out and heal. It's a healing process. And we know so much about that process today, but there's still a lot of denial around it. There's a lot of denial. And we have amazing body-mind technologies today for healing trauma, but there's a lot of misunderstanding about it. There's a lot of shame about it, and there's a lot of denial about it. And also, we're still demonizing and punishing it. We take most of the people end up in prison, not everybody. And it's not that we don't need to hold people accountable regardless of what drove their behaviors, but most of the people that get in trouble are traumatized people. And that's where their behavior is coming from.
Yeah.
Right. And then what we're doing with adolescents who, we've done all kinds of things environmentally that are lengthening puberty, like doubling it, so that your limbic system's on fire, but your frontal lobe good judgment your executive function hasn't developed yet. And so you're a risk taker, which is biologically designed into the human condition. And all kinds of other reasons why people are getting in trouble. And then, we don't take any collective responsibility for it.
Right.
We just want to blame that individual and put them away and brutalize them further instead of doing what needs to be healing. But there's so much denial and shame around mental health issues in this country.
Yeah.
And so it's for a lot of people, and I think often men especially, but men and women, it can be very difficult to seek the help they need. And then there's just so much, we have really good science. The thing is that our social services systems, and certainly our correctional systems, are based on really outmoded, sometimes religiously influenced pseudoscience. They're not based on current science.
Right.
We have great science and great understanding about how people heal and how people thrive, and we just haven't applied it.
And that's why I love your method, neurosomatic mindfulness, because I'm a big believer myself, going way back to Dr. John Sorno, just as far as mind body. So what does that practice feel like?
Yeah. Well, it's a particular approach to classic mindfulness and awareness meditation or mind training. And so with mindfulness, we place our attention on something, and of course the mind wanders because that's what the mind does. But we bring and typically it's the body or the breath, but we can use anything, but typically it's the body or the breath. And so mind wanders, we bring it back. Mind wanders, we bring it back. We keep doing that. Every time we do it, it's like we're exercising this muscle of mindfulness. We're actually reshaping our neural architecture. We're increasing the robustness of what's called the attention network, one of the neural networks in the brain. So that's basic mindfulness training, right?
Right.
But it can be really hard because we have something called the default mode network that's active when we don't direct our attention. And that's responsible for the very busy part of our mind, right? It's constantly time traveling into the past, ruminating about the past. It's time traveling into the future, worrying and fantasizing about the future. It keeps a running commentary about the imagined present. It's the constant self-centering, thinking about me, what do others think about me, forming all my opinions. It's the source of all the self-created stress. Now, that particular network can also be responsible for tremendous creativity if we can free it from the fear and anxiety of the human condition. But for most of us, most of the time, it's way overactive and it's pervaded with fear and anxiety, and it's the source of all of our stress. And also the constant reinforcement of the individualized, separate, illusory kind of self that disconnects us from others, right? So the thing is that when we engage our attention in a continuous way, we activate something called the task positive network, another network in the brain. And these two are mutually inhibitory, mutually antagonistic to a degree. So when we activate the task positive network, the default mode network starts to go offline and the mind quiets down naturally. Now, many people, when they try to practice mindfulness, they just find themselves struggling with the thoughts or trying to stop the thoughts. That's completely counterproductive and doesn't work. But if you engage the task positive network, it'll quiet down by itself. So how do you do that? Well, for me, the most effective way to do that is with deeply embodied practice. So it's not enough to say I'm going to focus on the breath or pay attention or observe the breath, because that's just a concept. And we actually have a psychosomatic conceptual body that is really a conceptual overlay, which is really how we experience the world. The brain is very rapidly replacing direct experience with concept all the time. So in neurosomatic mindfulness, we train to drop beneath that level and actually feel the actual tactile physical sensations externally and, very importantly, internally within the body, all the way down to the bones, that make up the lived experience we call body or we call breath. And when we're able to develop this deeply felt physicality, physical presence ever more deeply, that provides this continuous activation of the task positive network, and the default mode network starts to go offline, the mind quiets down, and so we get what's called attention stabilization. Now, as we're doing this with awareness, the body, mind, nerves, it's a learning machine, right? So it's learning how to do that. So any practice starts with effortful, intentional self-regulation of some kind. But over time, if you're practicing this deeply embodied way with awareness, it's learning to do it. So you move from effortful self-regulation to more effortless auto-regulation, which is really important because ultimately going deeper requires relaxation and letting go. So as you're training literally reshaping your neural architecture to be able to do this in a more auto-regulated, more effortless way, you're able to relax further. So you go from attention stabilization into deep states of awareness, into deep states of flow, which are profoundly healing for the nervous system. And current neuroscience shows that increased interoceptive awareness, the awareness of the internal landscape of the body, feeling that directly, increases emotional intelligence, increases emotion regulation. These all kind of increases our capacity to connect with others. So there's 5 neural networks that we work on directly activating and increasing their robustness. You can actually change your brain. The phenomenon of neuroplasticity we've known about for several decades.
Yeah.
You can have these neural networks become more robust because there's more connections, more dendrites, even more neurons in some cases. So you have the attention network. That's our ability to focus and concentrate. Then you have the task positive network I mentioned that kind of regulates the default network offline. Then you have the self-regulation network, which is regulating our own autonomic nervous system, which we can do with meditation, but also various kinds of breath work. And then you have the connected emotion regulation network, which allows us to have regulated emotions, to experience our emotions. That's very important. All the positive and the so-called negative emotion. We want to experience it all, but we don't want to be hijacked by it. Right. So you develop this neural architecture that allows you to have a rich emotional life, but well modulated. So you're not in this reactive mode. You're already in a relational mode. And then all that leads to also the robustness of our empathy connection network, our ability to connect with others. And then you can practice that as well. So we can literally reshape our neural architecture to become really extraordinarily high-performing human beings. And neurosomatic mindfulness is designed very specifically to do that and target these networks. And so our development can really be accelerated. And this is really important, the work we're doing with correctional officers, because I think probably the majority of people that try to start a mindfulness or meditation practice end up quitting because they don't get really good instruction, and it's just hard, it's boring, their body hurts, their mind's racing all over the time, and they're not getting any real results, so they quit. But if they get introduced to it in this deeply embodied way, they start getting results right away. They go, "Oh, yeah, I'll do that some more. That works. I feel better," right? And then you're just deepening and deepening it. You don't have to spend 30 years in a cave anymore to get profound results in meditation. You can do it much more rapidly than that with these very targeted approaches, which are really the integration of all the ancient yogic technology for East and West with current neuroscience, right?
Yes. Yes. I love this. And that's what, we always say, change your brain, change your life, right?
Absolutely.
And I feel like, Fleet, we could go on for hours here. So one, I'm going to ask you if you'll please come back at some point because I have so much more I want to go through with you. And two, I know people are going this isn't enough for everyone. So is there somewhere that we can send our listeners to get more info on you, whatever that, where can they go?
There's always my basic website, fleetmaull.com. They can learn a lot there. But HeartMind, where they'll find a lot of resources that are related to what we're talking about, is heartmind.co, heartmind.co. That's where we have all of the global summits that we do, summits on resilience, rewiring your brain summit, rewiring fear and anxiety summit coming up next month, all kinds of summits in these areas. Free summits that people can access for free. We do one every month. All kinds of online courses. That's all at heartmind.co. And if people are interested in the prison work, they can go to prisonmindfulness.org or Center for Mindfulness is mindfulpublicsafety.org. But you can really find your way there through any of my websites. They're all kind of interconnected.
Well, we'll put everything in the show notes, so don't worry about that. We will put all those links in there because this is too valuable, and this was incredible. Your wisdom is deeply grounded, but your message is just uplifting. You remind us that even in the darkest moments behind prison walls, that there's always a path to follow. And really, I think you have given everyone so much hope today. I can't thank you enough for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, MaryEllen, and thank you for the good work you're doing. It's a privilege to be able to share with your audience.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to Brains Are Us, brought to you by Centerpoint Research Institute. Want to try out our proprietary HoloSync brain-enhancing technology that's been changing lives for 35 years? Just visit myholosync.com/stream for a free 15-minute HoloSync session and feel the difference for yourself today. Until next time, be kind to your mind.